The television studio was packed. The audience had taken their seats, the lights were adjusted, and the cameras were ready to roll. Everyone was holding their breath for the most anticipated interview of the evening. As always, host Ethan Caldwell sat at his desk with a sly smile, skimming through his notes. He was known for his sharp, aggressive questions, a television host who made headlines by cornering celebrities. But tonight's guest was no ordinary person, Clint Eastwood. Despite being 94 years old, Clint Eastwood still sat tall, carrying the hardness and wisdom of his years in his eyes. He was Hollywood's legendary cowboy, the man who put villains in their place, the embodiment of true strength and charisma. These days, he didn't appear on camera as often as he once did, but his name still carried immense weight. As the program was about to begin, the signal from the director came. The cameras turned on, and Ethan launched into his usual opening. Good evening, dear viewers. Tonight we are joined by a living legend of American cinema. He has starred in dozens of unforgettable films, shaped the course of movie history, and remained an icon for decades. But tonight, we're not here to talk about his past. We're here to discuss the present and the future. In today's world, is the old school concept of masculinity still relevant? Mr. Clint Eastwood, welcome. Clint gave a slight nod from his seat. His eyes were calm, but there was a storm brewing inside. He had little patience for meaningless chatter and usually avoided pointless debates like these. But tonight he was here because he had something to say. As always, Ethan wasted no time trying to corner his guest. Here's where I want to start. The characters you've played in the past, tough, emotionless, authoritarian figures from a male-dominated world. But the world has changed. We don't need heroes like that anymore. The younger generation sees those figures as contributors to toxic masculinity. What do you say to that? Clint tilted his head slightly, studying Ethan for a moment before speaking in a low, gravelly voice. Ethan, the weak always lose in life. That's something you need to understand. And I'm not talking about physical strength. If your character isn't strong, if you have no discipline, no one will respect you. This so-called toxic masculinity you're talking about? It's nothing more than people refusing to take responsibility for their own lives. Ethan gave a small smile. This was the kind of answer he had been expecting. But today, people believe emotions matter more, Ethan countered. Instead of toughness, discipline, and authority, society encourages empathy, understanding, and emotional openness. Do you think that's wrong? Clint's eyes narrowed slightly. He took a deep breath, and for a moment the studio fell into heavy silence. The audience waited, eager to hear what he would say. Those are all nice words, Ethan. But words don't change the world. Actions do. A man or a woman being strong doesn't mean they harm others. Real strength is about taking responsibility. It's about taking control of your own life. Instead of trying to make people weaker to solve the world's problems, we should be making them stronger. Ethan paused. A murmur rippled through the studio as the audience absorbed Clint's words. But the host had no intention of backing down. He went for a harder strike. But Mr. Eastwood, you're a man of the past. The younger generation thinks differently now. Why should they take advice from a cowboy? Clint smirked. There was a sharp intelligence behind his tired but piercing gaze. Ethan, do you think I'm just a movie character? Clint asked. I'm not just an actor. I've spent my life advocating for discipline, hard work, and determination. I've always believed that people should face their challenges instead of running from them. If young people don't want to learn from that, that's their choice. But they should remember this. Life doesn't always treat you kindly, and one day when they need to be strong, they'll look back and rethink what they believe today. Ethan's smile faltered slightly. Clint Eastwood was proving to be a much harder wall to break than he had anticipated, but Ethan wasn't done yet. The tension in the studio was rising, and he was preparing for his next attack. The tension in the studio was thick enough to cut with a knife. The audience had started out amused, expecting another one of Ethan Caldwell's signature gotcha moments, where a guest would stumble under the weight of his carefully crafted questions. But Clint Eastwood wasn't stumbling. He sat there calm as a mountain, his eyes sharp and unwavering. He had faced bigger challenges than a talk show host trying to prove a point. This wasn't his first showdown, and it sure as hell wouldn't be the first time someone underestimated him. Ethan cleared his throat. forcing a smile. He wasn't about to let an old cowboy take control of his show. All right, he said, shifting in his seat. Let's talk about influence. You've spent decades portraying rugged lone wolf heroes, the kind of men who solve problems with a gun or a punch. Don't you think Hollywood has a responsibility to promote a different kind of hero? One that values diplomacy over violence? Clint leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees. His voice was steady, deliberate. Hollywood promotes a lot of things, Ethan. You ever see a movie where a guy saves the world by filling out paperwork? The audience chuckled. Even some of Ethan's crew members smirked. But Ethan wasn't done. I think the real question is, Ethan continued, regaining his composure, do you ever worry that your movies glorify outdated ideas of masculinity? That they send the wrong message to young men? Clint exhaled through his nose, shaking his head slightly. You ever actually watch my movies? He asked, raising an eyebrow. Ethan hesitated. Of course. Then you'd know that my characters don't go looking for trouble. They stand their ground when trouble comes to them. That's not toxic masculinity, son. That's survival. The audience let out a few scattered claps. Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his chair, feeling the energy of the room begin to slip away from him. He needed to turn this around. But look at society today, he pressed. We're at a point where people are questioning what it means to be a man. Your version of toughness, the old school, don't show weakness kind, some say it creates more division than unity. What do you say to that? Clint let the question hang in the air, his fingers tapping lightly on the armrest. Then he leaned back and spoke. You ever meet a firefighter? Ethan blinked. Excuse me? A firefighter, a cop, a guy in the military. Hell, even a single mother working 2 jobs to put food on the table. You ever talk to those people? You think toughness is their problem? Silence. Clint shook his head. No, man. Their toughness is what keeps the world running. The problem isn't toughness. The problem is people thinking strength is a bad thing, like it's dangerous. Weakness ain't a virtue, pal. Strength with control, that's what keeps people safe. Somewhere in the back, a man let out a low whistle. The shift in the room was becoming undeniable. The audience wasn't just listening, they were agreeing. Ethan felt his grip slipping. He opened his mouth, searching for the right words, but Clint wasn't finished. He raised a hand, not aggressively, just enough to signal that he wasn't done speaking. You want to know the real problem? Clint said, leaning forward. It's not toughness. It's people who talk about toughness like it's the enemy, while living in a world built and protected by tough people. You sit here in your nice suit with your scripted questions, trying to tell me what's outdated. Let me tell you something, son. If the world ever really goes sideways, if things get bad, you're going to be real happy there are still men like me around. Dead silence. Ethan swallowed. He had another question lined up, another attempt to regain control, but the audience wasn't nodding with him anymore. They were waiting for Clint's next words, and Clint wasn't letting up. Ethan forced a smile, trying to steady himself. I hear you, I do, he said, his voice measured. But let's be honest. There's a difference between being strong and refusing to change. A lot of people would say that your kind of thinking, this old school mindset, is what's holding society back. Don't you think it's time to move forward? Clint exhaled slowly, his gaze steady. He could have come back with another joke, another sharp one-liner. Instead, his tone shifted, calm, almost reflective. You ever seen a building being torn down? He asked. Ethan blinked. What? A demolition. You ever watch one? Ethan hesitated. I mean, yeah, I suppose. Clint nodded. Takes what? A few seconds to bring it down? A couple of charges? A button press? And boom, it's gone. He clasped his hands together. But you ever see one being built? Ethan didn't answer. That takes years, brick by brick, steel by steel, men working day and night, laying the foundation, making sure it can hold up. Now, the people with the detonators? He shook his head. They don't care about that. They don't think about the work, the sweat, the people who risk their lives to build it. They just want to see it come crashing down. The audience was locked in. Nobody moved. You say moving forward, Clint said, his voice low, deliberate. But moving where? Forward ain't always the right direction. Sometimes people get so caught up in change, They don't even stop to think about what they're tearing down. They don't ask if what they're breaking might actually be worth keeping. Ethan licked his lips. He could feel the weight of the moment. He had gone into this interview expecting an easy target, a Hollywood legend who would crack under pressure, a man who could be reduced to a caricature. But Clint Eastwood was proving him wrong. And worse, the audience knew it. The moment the cameras cut to a commercial break, Ethan Caldwell let out a slow breath. His palms were sweating. That wasn't how this was supposed to go. Clint Eastwood had walked into his studio, sat in his chair like he owned the place, and systematically dismantled every carefully rehearsed question Ethan had prepared. And worse, the audience wasn't on Ethan's side anymore. From the moment Clint had uttered the words, "moving where?" Zranya, the energy in the room had shifted. People weren't just watching an interview anymore. They were witnessing a reckoning. The red on-air light flickered off, and a producer's voice crackled in Ethan's earpiece. "We need to pivot. He's flipping the audience." Ethan clenched his jaw. He already knew that. He had spent years building his reputation as the guy who could trip up any guest, expose them, make them squirm. But Clint Eastwood wasn't squirming. The man was thriving. And outside the studio, the internet was already catching fire. While the cameras were still rolling, a few audience members had done what audience members always do. They pulled out their phones and hit record. Within minutes, clips of the showdown were flooding Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube. One particular clip, where Clint leaned forward and said, "If the world ever really goes sideways, you're going to be real happy there are still men like me around," was already at 500,000 views before the show even finished airing. It didn't take long for battle lines to be drawn. The critics. Clint Eastwood is just another outdated relic clinging to a past that no longer exists. Why do we still give these Hollywood dinosaurs a platform? Toxic masculinity on full display. This is exactly why we need new voices in the media. The supporters. Finally, someone with the guts to say what everyone's been thinking. Notice how Ethan had nothing when Clint flipped the tables? Classic. Clint Eastwood just gave a masterclass in shutting down media manipulation. One particular tweet from a retired firefighter went viral within hours. Clint gets it. Strength isn't about being a bully. It's about standing up when life knocks you down. We need more of that. A mother from Texas uploaded a TikTok. "I raised 3 boys on my own. If I hadn't been tough, they wouldn't have eaten. Don't tell me strength is a bad thing." Even an anonymous construction worker's comment on YouTube exploded. "Weak men talk about strength like it's dangerous. Strong men build the world they live in." By the time the show finished airing, Ethan Caldwell's network was already in full-blown damage control mode. Producers scrambled to edit out the most controversial moments before posting the official interview online. But it didn't matter. The unedited clips were already out there. On Twitter, the hashtag #, Clint Eastwood Truth started trending. On YouTube, reaction videos skyrocketed. Podcasters, commentators, and influencers from all sides of the political spectrum were dissecting the interview, breaking it down frame by frame. The comments, a battleground. Some were calling Clint a relic of a dying generation. Others were calling him the last real man in Hollywood. And Ethan, he tried to regain control. He posted a carefully worded tweet. "Healthy debate is important. I respect Mr. Eastwood's views even if I don't agree. Let's keep the conversation civil." It didn't work. Replies flooded in. "Respect? You tried to set him up, and he made you look like a fool. You're only tweeting this because you know you lost. Clint walked into your house and rearranged the furniture." Ethan stopped responding after that. While the internet argued over his words, Clint Eastwood was completely unfazed. No Twitter statements, no interviews, no press releases. He simply went about his day like nothing had happened, because Clint Eastwood had nothing to prove. But as the dust settled, a much bigger question started floating around. Was this just a viral moment, or had Clint exposed something deeper about modern society? The days passed, but the fire refused to die down. The Clint Eastwood interview wasn't just a moment anymore. It was a movement. Morning shows dissected it. Podcasts debated it. News segments tried to spin it in every direction possible. But no matter how hard they tried, the public had already made up their minds. Ethan Caldwell had walked into that interview expecting an easy target. Instead, he had walked out humiliated. And Clint Eastwood, he had walked out victorious. Ethan Caldwell's network scrambles. Behind the scenes, executives at Ethan's network were panicking. The show's ratings took a hit. Viewers started tuning out. It wasn't just that people disagreed with Ethan. It was worse than that. They stopped taking him seriously. The illusion had shattered. People now saw him for what he really was. A scripted host, carefully steering conversations, trying to trap his guests instead of interviewing them. Within weeks, Ethan was quietly reassigned to different segments. No more high-profile interviews. No more political debates. He wasn't canceled. But he wasn't the same rising star either. While media analysts and journalists argued over his words, Clint Eastwood did what Clint Eastwood always did. He said nothing. No press tours, no damage control, no apologies. He simply went about his life. But something strange happened. People started watching his old interviews again. Clips from his past resurfaced. Moments where he talked about discipline, resilience, and standing your ground. One particular clip from Rocky Balboa began trending again. It ain't about how hard you hit, it's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. Except this time, people were watching it through a different lens. It wasn't just a movie quote anymore. It was a statement, a reminder of something the world had forgotten. The debate over masculinity, strength, and resilience wasn't new. But the Clint Eastwood interview had reignited it in a way no one expected. Young men started showing up at boxing gyms, not because they wanted to fight, but because they wanted to toughen up. Fathers started talking to their sons about responsibility, not victimhood. Workers, factory workers, truck drivers, firefighters started speaking up. We've been living like this our whole lives. Why is it controversial now? A construction worker's Facebook post summed it up perfectly. Weak men hate strong men because they remind them of what they should be. It wasn't just a viral moment anymore. It was a wake-up call. A week later, Clint Eastwood was spotted at a small gym in San Diego. A local reporter, recognizing him, approached. "Mr. Eastwood, do you have any comment on the interview?" Clint wiped the sweat from his forehead, took a sip of water, and shrugged. "Look, man, I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was just being honest." The reporter pressed. "Did you expect the reaction to be this big?" Clint chuckled. "I've been around a long time. People always act surprised when someone tells the truth. No grand statement, no victory lap, just a man who said what he believed and moved on." But as the noise settled, one final question remained. Was Clint Eastwood just an old cowboy clinging to the past, or had he just reminded the world of something it desperately needed to hear? Maybe that's for you to decide. But if you made it this far, ask yourself, what kind of strength do you value? The kind that folds when it's questioned, or the kind that stands firm when it matters most? Because at the end of the day, toughness isn't about muscles. It's about who you are when no one's watching. If you like this story, subscribe for more. Because in a world full of noise, the truth still matters.